My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 36 years old. I live in San Diego, California. I work as a project manager for a healthcare tech company. And in my family, I've always been the one who handles everything no one else wants to deal with. Bills, planning, emergencies. If something went wrong, they didn't ask if I could fix it. They assumed I already would. So when the Aspen trip came together, I was the one who paid for it. Flights for 7 people. A luxury cabin for 5 nights. Ski passes. Equipment rentals. Private shuttle. $11,842.63. All charged to my card. Because we'll settle it after, Natalie. You know how we are. Yeah, I knew exactly how they were. I just chose to believe this time would be different. My son, Caleb, was excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. He was 9, and ever since the divorce, something in him had been quieter. More careful. But this trip, he kept watching ski videos, practicing how to stand on imaginary skis in the living room, laughing when he fell onto the couch. He told his teacher he was going to see snow for the first time. I let myself believe it too, that maybe this trip wasn't just a vacation, maybe it was a reset. For him. For me. For all of us. Then, 2 nights before our flight, my phone rang. It was my brother, Jason. He didn't even say hello. He just said, "Hey, don't freak out, but there's been a change." That was the moment my stomach dropped. Because in my family, don't freak out always meant I absolutely should. I asked him what kind of change. There was a pause. Then he said it. "Claire thinks it's better if you and Caleb don't come." Claire. His wife. For a second I honestly thought I misheard him. "I'm sorry." "What?" He exhaled like I was being difficult. You know how sensitive Caleb can be. The kids they don't really want to deal with that energy on the trip. Energy. He called my son energy. I felt something inside me go very, very still. I asked him if he was seriously telling me that my child was being uninvited from a trip I paid for 2 days before we left. He said, "It's not like that." It was exactly like that. He kept talking, filling the silence with excuses. They just want things to be easy, no tension, you understand, right? No, I didn't. Because Caleb wasn't difficult, he wasn't dramatic. He was careful. Careful because he had learned far too early that people in his own family only liked him when he was quiet. When he didn't take up space, when he didn't make them uncomfortable. And now they were punishing him for exactly that. I asked one question. "So what happens to the trip?" Another pause. Then casually, "We're still going." That was it. That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clean. Like a line finally snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. I walked into Caleb's room. He was sitting on the floor organizing what he wanted to bring in his backpack. A little snow globe he insisted on packing for inspiration. A notebook. A pair of gloves he'd worn 3 times already around the house. He looked up at me and smiled. "Are we leaving early for the airport?" I opened my mouth. And for a second, nothing came out. Because in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about a trip anymore. It was about what my son was going to learn by watching me. I could teach him to accept this, to smile, stay quiet, not cause problems. Or I could show him that being treated like you don't matter has consequences. I told him I needed a few minutes to check something for work. He nodded immediately. Of course he did. He always made things easier for me. That hurt more than anything. I walked into the kitchen, closed the door behind me, and picked up my phone. There was only one person I trusted to tell me the truth without sugarcoating it. Daniel Hayes. We'd been friends since college. He was now a litigation attorney in downtown San Diego, the kind of lawyer who didn't raise his voice, but didn't lose either. He answered on the second ring. "Natalie? You okay?" I wasn't, but I told him everything anyway. The trip, the money, the call. The part about Caleb. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked one question. "How much did you pay?" "Almost $12,000. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. Not warmer, not colder, sharper. "Natalie, they excluded you and your child from a trip you fully funded, and they're still planning to go?" "Yes." Another pause. "Then okay, then this isn't family drama." I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge. "Then what is it?" "It's a case." Daniel didn't rush me. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people, when you tell them something like that, they react fast. Too fast. Anger, advice, emoji. But Daniel just listened. And somehow that made everything feel more real. Walk me through everything, he said calmly. Start from the beginning. Not just what happened tonight. So I did. I told him about the group chat where the trip started. About my mom saying it would be so nice for the whole family to finally do something together. About Claire sending links to cabins she liked, none of which she paid for. About Jason saying, Nat, you're the organized one, can you just book it and we'll figure out the money later? I told him about every payment, every confirmation email, every thank you that now felt like a setup. By the time I finished, my throat felt dry and my hands were shaking. Daniel didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he asked, do you still have everything? Everything? Receipts, messages, but the Virginia. Anything that shows there was an understanding they would pay you back. I looked at my laptop sitting on the kitchen table. Yeah, I think so. Not think, no. Something in his tone made me straighten. I have it. Good, he said. Because starting right now, this isn't about feelings, it's about proof. I sat down slowly. My heart was still racing, but there was something else now, too. Focus. What do I do? I asked. First, he said, you don't call anyone back. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. They're already texting. I know, he said, and you're going to ignore it. That went against every instinct I had. My entire life, I had been the one who responded immediately, fixed things quickly, smoothed everything over before it could turn into something bigger. Silence felt wrong, dangerous even, but Daniel kept going. You don't argue. You don't explain. You don't defend yourself. You don't give them time to rewrite the story before we lock it down. We? I repeated. Yes, he said simply. We. That word did something to me, because for the first time since Jason's call, I didn't feel alone. Second, he continued, you gather everything tonight, every receipt, every charge, every message where they acknowledge the plan to reimburse you. I opened my laptop immediately, my fingers moved almost automatically. Email confirmations, booking invoices, flight details, the cabin rental agreement, $6,200 for the house alone. I clicked into my messages. There it was. This place is perfect. Just book it. We'll settle after like always. My mom, you're a lifesaver, Natalie. We'll all pay you back once we're back home. I stared at that last message. For a second I couldn't breathe. Daniel, I said quietly, I found it. Save it, he said immediately. Screenshot it. Email it to yourself. Back it up somewhere else too. So I did. I created a folder, then another. Then I uploaded everything to cloud storage. It felt excessive, paranoid even, but at the same time, it felt right. Like I was finally taking something seriously that I'd been brushing off for years. Good, Daniel said after I told him. Now listen carefully. I leaned forward. If they go on that trip using what you paid for after excluding you. He paused slightly, choosing his words. That strengthens your position significantly. I blinked. Wait, you're saying I should let them go? I'm saying you don't stop them, he replied calmly. That didn't sit right. They're going to enjoy a vacation I paid for while my son sits here thinking it just fell apart. I know, he said, and I'm not pretending that's fair. His voice softened just slightly. But legally, them going makes this cleaner, simpler, stronger. I closed my eyes for a second. This wasn't just emotional anymore. This was strategic. And what happens after? I asked. After, he said, we give them a chance to do the right thing. I almost laughed. You haven't met my family. I don't need to, he said. Their messages already told me everything. That hit harder than I expected, because he was right. They had told me exactly who they were. I just hadn't wanted to listen. Tomorrow morning, Daniel continued, I'll come by. We'll draft a formal request for reimbursement. Clear. Professional. No emoji. And if they refuse, another pause, this one heavier. Then we file. The word landed like something solid. Final. Real. I looked toward Caleb's room again. The door was still slightly open. I could hear him talking softly to himself, still packing, still believing. And suddenly this wasn't complicated anymore. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, Daniel echoed. We stayed on the phone while I kept organizing everything, for nearly 2 hours. By the time we hung up, my kitchen didn't look like a kitchen anymore. It looked like evidence. Receipts spread across the table. Laptop glowing. Phone buzzing occasionally with messages I refused to open. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. You're overreacting. This isn't a big deal. Why are you making this complicated? They always said the same things, just in different words. I finally stood up and walked to Caleb's room. He was asleep, half on top of the blankets, one glove still on his hand. The snow globe was tucked beside his pillow, like it belonged there. I stood in the doorway for a long time, and something shifted again. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter, stronger. Clarity. They thought this would play out the way it always had, that I would absorb it, explain it away, protect them from consequences. They were wrong. The next morning, Daniel showed up at exactly 8:15, 2 coffees in one hand, a legal pad in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but his focus was sharp. "Show me everything," he said as he stepped inside. We sat at the table. I walked him through it all again, this time slower, more detailed. He asked precise questions, dates, amounts, exact wording. At one point, he circled a printed message and tapped it with his pen. "This," he said, "is important. It was my mom's message again. We'll all pay you back once we're back home." "That kills any gift argument," he said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Good." Then he leaned back slightly. "We're gonna write something simple." He slid the legal pad toward himself and started drafting. No emoji, no vanilla, just facts. Clear, direct, impossible to twist. When he finished, he handed it to me. I read it twice. It felt cold, but in a strange way that made it feel powerful. "Send it to your mom," he said. "Only her?" "Only her?" I nodded, took my phone, copied the message, and hit send. The moment it went through, my stomach dropped, like something irreversible had just started. We didn't have to wait long. 3 minutes later, my phone lit up. "Mom." I opened it, and immediately wished I hadn't. Her response was long, way longer than mine, and every line of it made my chest tighten. She said the money had been a gift. She said I was being selfish. She said I was ruining the spirit of the trip. Then she went further. Lower. She wrote, "Maybe if Caleb didn't struggle so much socially, this wouldn't have been an issue." I stopped reading. I couldn't. For a second, everything blurred. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. I handed the phone to Daniel without saying anything. He read it slowly. Once. Then again. His jaw tightened slightly. "Save this," he said. "Good." Before I could respond, another notification came through. "Jason?" Then another. "Claire," the flood had started, and this time I didn't answer. The messages didn't stop. Jason first, then Claire, then my father. Then a long thread in the family group chat that I hadn't opened in months suddenly came alive like nothing had happened. But I didn't read most of it. I didn't need to anymore. Because Daniel had already seen everything. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was following a plan. 2 days later, the formal request for reimbursement had been ignored. Not refused. Not negotiated. Ignored. That silence was louder than anything they had said before. Daniel looked at the timestamp on the email and exhaled slowly. "That's it," he said. "We file." I remember sitting there at my kitchen table watching him prepare the documents. It didn't feel dramatic. No shaking hands. No big emotional moment. Just paperwork. But somehow it felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Because this wasn't a fight anymore. It was irreversible. When the court date arrived, I barely slept. Neither did Caleb, though he didn't fully understand why. I told him we were handling a grown-up problem. He accepted that the way kids do when they trust you completely. That trust hurt more than anything else. Daniel picked us up that morning. He wore a simple suit. "No tie. You ready?" he asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. The courthouse in downtown San Diego felt colder than I remembered. Everything echoed. Footsteps, doors, voices. And then I saw them. My family. All of them. Jason stood with Claire, arms crossed. My mother avoided my eyes completely. My father looked like he had aged 5 years in a week. They weren't loud anymore. They weren't confident. They looked uncertain. That was new. We didn't speak. Daniel gently guided me forward. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too clean, too structured, too real. Daniel laid everything out. Receipts, bank statements, messages, booking confirmations. Every piece of the trip reconstructed like a timeline that couldn't be denied. Then he showed the messages. "Just book it. We'll settle after like always." "You're a lifesaver, Natalie. We'll all pay you back once we're home." He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. Then Claire's messages came up. The exclusion. The decision that Caleb and I were not a good fit for the trip anymore. The judge listened without interruption. Expression unreadable. Then the opposing lawyer tried to argue. That was a family arrangement. not a contractual obligation. Daniel stood up calmly. And yet, he said, turning slightly, the defendant was explicitly instructed to front the costs with repeated assurances of reimbursement. He paused, long enough for it to land. Multiple times. Silence. Then the judge turned to my mother. Was there an understanding that repayment would occur? That moment felt like everything slowed down. My mother hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Yes, she finally said. One word. And everything collapsed. Because that was the truth they couldn't reshape anymore. The judge didn't hesitate after that. Full reimbursement. Plus court costs, no negotiation, no ambiguity, just a ruling. When it was over, I didn't feel what I expected. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just quiet. Outside the courthouse, they stood a few feet away. No one approached me. Jason looked like he wanted to speak, but Claire touched his arm and shook her head slightly. My father avoided looking at me entirely. My mother stood still for a moment, then turned away. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just distance. Daniel walked beside me as we headed to the car. You okay? He asked. I looked down at Caleb holding my hand. He was swinging it gently like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't shifted underneath us. I think so, I said. But the truth was, I didn't feel like the same person anymore, and I wasn't supposed to. The payments started coming in within weeks. No messages, no notes, just transfers. Cold, impersonal, mechanical, like they were trying to erase the fact that any of it had ever been emotional. My mother paid first. Jason followed. Claire dragged hers out in smaller amounts, as if stretching it out would somehow soften it. My father sent his without a word. And then came silence. Real silence this time, not the kind filled with tension or waiting, just absence. For a while, it felt strange, empty. But then something else began to replace it. Space. Caleb noticed it first. One evening, months later, he looked up from his homework and said, Mom, it feels quieter now. I smiled slightly. It is. Is that good? I thought about it for a moment. Yes, I said, it is. Because silence used to mean I was waiting for the next problem. Now it meant there wasn't one. So Daniel stayed in our lives. Not dramatically, not as some sudden replacement. Just consistently. He showed up for dinner, for school events, for the ordinary things that slowly rebuild a life. And Caleb started laughing more again. Not carefully, not politely, just freely. One night, almost a year later, we went to the beach, the same one we always went to. Kayla ran ahead barefoot, shouting that he wanted to build the biggest impossible sandcastle. Daniel walked beside me quietly. You ever think about them? He asked. Sometimes, I admitted. Do you miss them? I watched Caleb digging in the sand. No, I said honestly. I miss who I thought they were. Daniel nodded like that made perfect sense. We stood there for a while without speaking. Then Caleb ran back up to us, breathless and laughing. Look, he said proudly. It has walls and a moat, and it's impossible to destroy. Daniel knelt down beside him. Then it's perfect. Caleb grinned like that was the highest compliment in the world. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. The life I had lost wasn't the one I should have been fighting to keep. It was the one I needed to walk away from. Later that night, as the sun started to set, Caleb leaned against me and said softly, This feels better than before. I looked at him. Before what? He thought for a second. Before everything got bad. I kissed the top of his head. Yeah, I said quietly, it does. Because this was the part no one tells you. When you stop accepting being used, you don't lose family. You lose access to people who never treated you like one in the first place. And what comes after isn't emptiness. It's clarity. It's peace. It's the beginning of something real. Our team at Storytelling Production is committed to creating thoughtful, meaningful narratives that highlight emotional growth, self-respect, and resilience. Every story is fictional, crafted to reflect real human lessons about boundaries, family, and personal strength. This story reminds us that true love is never conditional on usefulness, and that walking away from harmful relationships can be the beginning of healing, not the end of connection.